Good afternoon. My name is Sylvia Oberly from the Boston Thurman United Initiative in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, one of the newer initiatives here and newer network members here, and we're so excited to be part of you. I recently retired. Actually, it's a re-retirement. You've heard of those, as initial executive director of our community quarterback organization. And happy to have my successor here with us today, Regina Hall, and other members of our team here at the conference. Boston Thurman United is working in a neighborhood just north of downtown Winston-Salem, which has a rich history dating to the early 1900s as a thriving African-American community of families of all incomes. Teachers, professionals, business owners, workers in the downtown factories all live together side by side. There were strong schools with significant histories of their own. But through the years, the neighborhood became fragmented by a four-lane thoroughfare cutting through the middle of it, closing stores and businesses and creating deteriorating housing conditions. Stories we see in many other communities, some of which earlier today. And like many of you, we are beginning to tackle these issues through the exciting pillars of the purpose-built network of housing and solid educational pipeline in our community and building on existing community health and wellness assets. These are exciting times for us in Boston Thurman, yet for us, like many of you, there remain glaring racial wealth and income disparities. So I really appreciate the opportunity to introduce this session today and to learn along with you, focused on the work of Reach Riverside in Wilmington, Delaware, which is working with Prosperity Now to address racial wealth equity outcomes. As we have heard several times already in the conference, inherent in the goal of breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty is addressing this racial wealth gap. What is special about the Purpose-Built Network is that each local project provides insight and innovation, and the reason we are here together is to learn from each other. This session is the first of two sessions today by Prosperity Now, and leading this session is Lillian Singh, Vice President of Racial Wealth Equity for Prosperity Now, a national intermediary tackling financial insecurity from all angles. Let me tell you a little bit about Lillian. She joined the organization in 2015 to launch the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative. She provides strategic oversight to all program teams, which work to strengthen the executive leadership and organizational capacity of nonprofit organizations in over a dozen cities, specifically working to find solutions to the problem of growing economic inequality, including income gaps, gentrification, unemployment, underemployment, and affordable housing. In addition, Mrs. Singh provides financial planning, coaching, and wealth management guidance to individual families at a licensed securities and investment representative, and uses these lessons and practices to inform the project development and implementation work at Prosperity Now. She will introduce the other members of the panel this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming Lillian Singh and our panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. I want to thank the Purpose-Built community, and Evan, are you still in the room? And Michelle, thank you guys so much for your partnership and inviting us, Prosperity Now, to join in your network on today. So as Sylvia mentioned, Prosperity Now is a national intermediary, and since inception, I've been at Prosperity Now launching the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative, and we unapologetically serve and work on behalf of organizations led by and serving people of color. In this work, what we've learned is that organizational leaders of color are best positioned to serve communities of color. They're knowledgeable of the history. They're oftentimes of and from those communities in which they operate in. So we work with them and we partner with them to help them advance policies, agitate power brokers in their ecosystems, share best practices that's informed and always informed by data. So I was actually introduced to the Purpose-Built community through Logan, who is on our panel today, when we launched an initiative in 2017 funded by JPMorgan Chase in Wilmington called the Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color Project. And I know it's a lot of us from the Wilmington Reach Riverside crew in the house. Raise your hand if you're a part of that crew. All right. Because what I know is that the work can't be done by one person, and that's why I'm so excited to be in this room. I'm going to shout out to my crew, the Racial Wealth Divide crew that's in the house. Raise your hand. All right, y'all ain't got to be as loud as Reach Riverside. Anyway. All right. So a little bit about Prosperity Now. You already heard it. But we are really working with ecosystems of nonprofits in over 12 states, 15 cities. We believe that the wealth of knowledge is on the ground. Our approach is always grassroots. How do we actually bring and elevate the solutions that are happening on the ground and elevate them to power brokers and stakeholders who actually have power within the ecosystem? That's why we operate. That's how we operate. Oh, I lost my PowerPoint. And we also acknowledge the truth that our organizations are faced with. And over this conference so far, you know, we've been talking about this idea of the American dream. A dream that tells us that everyone in this country can achieve their highest goals and aspirations through hard work and grit and dedication. What we know to be true, unfortunately, is that this is simply unfounded. Grit and hard work doesn't always allow you to achieve prosperity. The reality is that achieving economic success has less to do with what we do and more to do with the wealth position in which we were born. We've heard a lot of this already. But we always frame this conversation in this way. We empower our organizations that we work with in the ecosystem to understand that individual behavior is not the reason for structural economic inequality that they're fighting against, that you guys are building up against, that you guys are trying to actually dismantle. So the framing that oftentimes is used, we believe is actually wrong. It's more accurate to say that the economic circumstances constrains choice itself, leaving people, usually poor Black and brown people, with few options to turn to. But we're excited about continuing to move in this ecosystem and work in this ecosystem because there's great opportunity. And there's great opportunity when we saw this work being launched in Wilmington. We were actually securing this cohort of 70 organizations in that ecosystem. And Logan, even before he was accepted to your network, was like, y'all gonna accept me to your initiative. And I was like, all right, Logan, hold down. You know, it's other people in the ecosystem here in Wilmington. But we were really excited to be able to work in Wilmington because he was really fired up about really addressing the inequality through a racial equity lens. The strength in Wilmington lies within the diversity because it's actually one of the most popular and most accessible cities in the entire city of Delaware, right? It is the national financial center for the credit card industry, and Wilmington sees over $450 million in private investments annually. Delaware is ranked in 10th in the nation, and 66 of the Fortune 500 companies are incorporating in the state. Wealth creation opportunities is clearly available, but is it accessible? So despite being a small city, only 11 square miles of landmass, the challenge before us in Wilmington is that it is a microcosm of racial economic inequality. As we detailed in our Racial Wealth Divide profiles that we create and launch in cities to help normalize a conversation about racial economic inequality, the city of Wilmington is 57% Black, 12% Latino, but across every single economic indicator, Black and Latino residents lag significantly behind their white counterparts. Typically, smaller metro cities, right, tend to have less racial segregation, but this is actually not the case for Wilmington. And when we look at 4 major indicators, and when I say we, our team, we ground ourselves in 4 major indicators when we assess economic inequality in a city. We look at income, unemployment, housing, and education outcomes and disparities. What we see is that income is a huge generator. I will argue, me personally, the #1 indicator for wealth creation. Without income, you cannot build wealth. Hard stop, period. That's what I will argue. I have some sociologists in the room and other economics folks who may disagree with me. But however, when we look at the data in Wilmington, we see that unemployment, the income for African-American families is $30,000 compared to $60,000 for whites. You have to design differently if that's what the data is telling us. You have to acknowledge the disparity in the development and the design of your programming if that's what the data is telling us. We also know that unemployment rates for Wilmingtonians who are African American are 10 times that of whites in the city, right? You have to design differently if that's what the data is telling you. We also know that the home ownership rates for Wilmingtonians, African Americans, are about that of whites, are about that of the national averages. But the home equity values for African Americans within the city is about $120,000 less, which means that the amount of equity and wealth that's in our home, which is our greatest asset, cannot be leveraged by black families in the city in the same way. Again, you have to design differently if you're gonna expect a different outcome through a racial equity lens. Last but not least, and I don't wanna really say the statistic because I was so inspired about visiting Eastlake and seeing the beautiful school, right? But one of the things that we know and what the data tells us is that there are no equalized outcomes with respect to education. In fact, what we know is that black educated households have less wealth than a white household who only has a high school degree. So the transfer and the investment of our education is manifesting very differently in the ecosystem for people of color. Again, you have to design differently if you expect a different outcome. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our friend Logan Heron here, and because I'm really inspired about the power of the ecosystem, the folks that are supporting him, and the work of his team, Reach Riverside, because we have an incredible opportunity to design differently with such a small radius to actually cover. The challenges, as I just outlined, are huge. They're insurmountable, sometimes we see. But what I believe is that if we actually start off this right, keeping in mind racial economic inequality, the indicators, designing with those indicators in mind and combating them on the front end, you can get a better outcome on the back end. So without further ado, Logan here is the CEO for Reach Riverside, Kingswood Community Center, and the Warehouse. Kingswood serves young and old alike, including an early learning center and a senior center. Reach Riverside is a nonprofit community development corporation created to lead the $2 million revitalization of the Riverside neighborhood. Reach and Kingswood are working in partnership with The Warehouse, a co-working facility and network for teen-serving organizations designed to address violence, academic performance, and workforce readiness among Wilmington's youth by providing access to more than 130 teen-focused programs and service providers. So Logan is going to come up here and he's going to share a little bit about a little deep dive about what he's doing in Reach Riverside and what he's up against with his network members who are working his ecosystem there. Logan.
Thank you, Lillian. So Lillian gave me 4 minutes, so I'm going to start my clock. She don't play. You can't tell. So the history of Riverside dates back to the 1950s. Like many public housing projects, what we heard by Richard Rothstein last night is that it started post-World War II. In the 1950s, in the Riverside neighborhood, about 500 units of housing were built. There are two major housing projects in Wilmington, Delaware, Southbridge at another part of the city and Riverside. Southbridge was built for black veterans coming back from war. Riverside was built for white veterans coming back from war. When we have what is known as white flight, and whites had the ability to purchase homes in the suburbs and blacks didn't, blacks then consumed the neighborhood of Riverside, and we've had concentrated poverty ever since. Now, Wilmington, like most metropolitan cities, is seeing a large influx of development. About $1 billion of development have occurred downtown. One of the biggest, actually our biggest developer is on our board to address some of the issues, systemic issues that we're facing in the Riverside neighborhood. But Riverside, like most urban neighborhoods that are populated with black and brown people, do not see that same investment that happens in those downtown areas. To speak to the statistics of Riverside, 70% of the children that live in the Riverside neighborhood live in poverty, which leads all of Wilmington. We have a median household income of about $10,000, and 32% of our adults are working. Now, this map here below is a heat map of resources that are available. You can see the Riverside Census Tract here, 30.02, and down here, this shows some of the resources that are available, which are very limited in our neighborhood. And if you can believe it, one of these resources, this dot here, is actually our correctional institution for our county. So that's considered one of the resources in our neighborhood, believe it or not. Now, our governor, who is a good friend to our project and our initiative, always says, as Wilmington goes, the state of Delaware goes. But when you think of childhood poverty, and we have a slide that we usually show provided by Purpose Built that says childhood poverty every year costs America about $500 billion. So when we look at a neighborhood like Riverside, how much is it costing the economy of Delaware? And if we could turn around Riverside, we can turn around the city of Wilmington, and we can turn around the state of Delaware. Now, before I came to Kingswood about 3.5 years ago, it was a failing organization. The doors were about to close. They had missed payroll. The previous ED had led it down a dark path. And I came in, and my job was to really sustain the organization, because if we were going to be part of a purpose-built community that we thought was far-fetched at the time, a couple years ago, we really had to sustain the organization. And Kingswood sits on 12 acres of land. So we knew that we had an asset to contribute, but we really had to figure out how we just sustain the organization. Now, you know, CBOs, and I'm checking my time, Lillian, community-based organizations really have those answers, and Lillian touched on it. Those answers to the solutions, but really lack the capacity. And what we have here is a picture of our master plan, which includes about 600 units of housing, a new Kingswood Community Center, the warehouse, and health and wellness facilities. And because we have the answers, but we lack the capacity, we need partners to step up. Partners like the Longwood Foundation, which is the largest funder in Delaware. You know, we were not in good graces with Longwood about 5 years ago. Vowed to never fund us again. In the last 2 years, $1 million to support Kingswood in the warehouse. Christiana Care, the major healthcare system in Delaware, $1 million this year to contribute to our efforts to build capacity. And lastly, Mary, representing JP Morgan Chase, nearly committed $500,000 to support this work and build capacity. So you're seeing 3 examples of how people have leaned in, stepped up, and said, we see the issues, we see the leadership that's taking place here in the Riverside neighborhood, we see the team that you're building, and we want to be a part of this. Last but not least, we do have 3 organizations, and it gets complex and confusing a little bit. But these 3 organizations include about 100 employees. And if you work for Reach Riverside, you work for all 3 organizations. We call ourselves the Work Group, WRK. And our collective mission is to empower the community to reach its full potential by eliminating the barriers of structural racism and revolutionizing teen engagement. That's the Work Group. That's what we do. And we like to call our model the Thanksgiving model. We like to say collective impact. We call it Thanksgiving. We have hundreds of partners that specialize in certain areas. And we tell them, bring the dish that you make particularly well. And at the end of the day, we'll have plenty of leftovers. Thank you.
I want to make sure that I introduce our fellow panelists. Mary Horstman, who's Program Officer, Vice President of Global Philanthropy at JP Morgan Chase in Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. In her role, she supports neighborhood revitalization, workforce development, financial health, and small business growth. And Thayer DuPont is the president of the Longwood Foundation, a private foundation principally supporting charitable organizations in the state of Delaware and Southern Chester County, Pennsylvania. He is the chair of the Community Education Building in Wilmington, a collaborative of K through 12 education program that operates the building hosting 1,200 largely inner city students. All right. So thank you so much for coming in from Wilmington to be with us today and being a part of this panel. As I was preparing them for the panel, I said, I'm gonna ask some hard questions, so I'm gonna send them to y'all in advance so that we can really get to it. So we're gonna do our very best in the next 30 minutes to go through 3 rounds of questions focused on developing and investing through a racial equity lens. So as a funder in the Wilmington ecosystem, you know, being a part of the solution requires a strategic and targeted financial investment. I think one of the things that we've learned in working across cities and with the organizations we work with is that funders are in a unique position as they assess risk, right? Traditional ways, which is, how's the organization doing? Their balance sheets, who's on their board, how are they actually showing up in the community? Or untraditional ways, or I would say through an equity lens, of really understanding the impact of racial and economic discrimination and engagement or lack thereof from the from the philanthropic arena. So the question that I have is, as you are dealing with the issue of the type of risk that you take as a funder, with these types of models, I'm going to go with you first. There is the Longwood Foundation, as Logan had already mentioned, has invested, in this new model, even though there is some truth to misappropriation of funds in the past, not delivering on grant deliverables. The question is just really basic. Why? Why are you investing? Like, what now makes this investment different?
So first of all, thank you, Logan and Lillian, for the opportunity here today. And secondly, you talk about risk. Philanthropy is risk. All of our investments entail risk. Sometimes that risk turns into fraud and outright theft. And we had seen that in Kingswood. What was different? It was Logan and the team that he had assembled around himself, and the plan he had for Kingswood, which was the first investment we made with a different leader and a different board. And then Reach Riverside came along a year later, and now the vision was even bigger. The partners were more meaningful, and the work had already begun to be delivered in Kingswood. So you have a leader with credibility and past work that he had done preceding Kingswood with us and with others. You have a board, a brand new board, so new governance. You have a nationally benchmarked, if not proven, model in purpose-built. So bringing all those dimensions plus authentic community connection. And I don't think you talked about it in your opening remarks, but the warehouse, a big chunk, I don't know what percentage, is designed by the teams who are going to use it.
Absolutely.
And so, there's really authentic engagement at the grassroots level. Then obviously, as you referenced earlier, Logan is both of and from the community. So all those dimensions led to the different outcome.
Yeah, I appreciate you keeping it real there, because I think one of the models that we know is that a lot of leaders of color need validation. They need to be validated by a larger ecosystem or a larger voice, and that's a part of our work at Prosperity Now. It's not that they're not leaders of color operating and doing great work, it's because no one has validated them as a leader. So I appreciate you saying it was just Logan. So, Mary.
No pressure.
No pressure, Logan. You're fairly new to the Wilmington scene, right? So we just actually introduced after we had launched our model in Wilmington. But you've decided, already that you're going to not only commit to the build out, but you also made, an additional commitment, financial commitment, to Reach and the work that they're doing. Like, what motivated you to do this?
Yeah. So I think, with like a lot of funders, we really look for projects that involve that dirty C word, catalytic. And so, I think Reach Riverside has been really exciting. Lillian talked a little bit about, we have these 4 focus areas: neighborhood revitalization, workforce development, financial health, small business. But like the real magic happens when we start to see those things aligned. And so that's why purpose-built is so powerful as a model, is because it's thinking holistically. As you all know, you can't address someone's ability to show up for work on time and really do that job well if they're not going home to someplace safe where they feel like they're able to rest and rebuild. And so I think thinking about that, it was really exciting to us. And I think like we want to, whatever investment we want to make sure we're leaving the place better than we found it. So Girl Scout rule. So that means like we want to scale models that work, check. We want to support the drawdown of additional funds, and we're really fortunate to have Christiana Care and other health systems in Delaware who are really at the vanguard of what that work around social determinants of health looks like, and really leading the nation in that work. And we want to make sure we're strengthening the capacity of organizations to draw down additional funds. And I think Logan and his team are really thoughtful about how are they preparing themselves to be able to react not just to philanthropic opportunities, but also being able to access capital from other places. And I think like the other big thing that's really critical here is how are we helping residents to recognize their own power and leverage it? And so the thoughtfulness with which Kingswood and Reach Riverside is doing that, the level in which residents are killing it in Riverside. Like and I think like having gone through a lot of collective impact models in a lot of places on a lot of different activities, there is really a qualitative difference in having residents present and having them engaged. And so you really see that in Riverside, and it's really powerful, and that's what's going to transform this community. Obviously, like the physical space and the capital projects are going to be powerful, and the program's going to be powerful, but at the end of the day, the residents recognize their own power and know how to leverage it, and that's where transformational change is going to happen.
Thank you, Mary. So on to Logan, CEO of 3 enterprises. No pressure, right? A question that we have is, how would you steward this investment to ensure that you can maintain the work and ensure that those are most in need are actually impacted, right, in righteous ways? Like, how are you going to sustain this?
So, well, I think there's 2 parts to that question. The first thing is how can we be good stewards of the money? And I think we're showing that by the 3 organizations coming together and saying, we're going to work together to collectively have the best and most meaningful impact that we can have in the community. And we do have a great team, and all of them, most of them are here today and at the conference. And we can afford to pay for that team, which is tremendous talent that most organizations can't, because we split the bill 3 ways. So if, JP Morgan Chase makes a $5 million contribution, we speak things into existence at Reach Riverside, first and foremost. So when JP Morgan Chase makes a $5 million contribution.
Glad that was you. Great. Yeah.
They're actually making a $15 million contribution, because that $5 million gets spread across the 3 organizations, 100 employees, and we're knee deep in the work every single day, and it really gets tripled. The second part of that question was, how do we sustain it?
Yeah.
The buy-in from the community. If you're really going to sustain this work, you have to have the buy-in from the community, which means the community has to be involved from day one. Before we announced and had a big presentation where we became a purpose-built community, and Carol and Evan and everyone came up with the governor and the county exec and the mayor, and we were signing and we're doing a press release 5 days before, we invited the community in and said, this is what we're planning to do. Are you good with this? And if you're not, we're canceling the press release. Yeah. And they're like, we appreciate you for bringing us in. So master planning processes, going to visit other sites that are within the region with our master developer, having chat and choose. We were really able to build on this trust that Kingswood had reestablished a couple of years prior. And just having the community at the table, not on the table, is making a difference. And that's how we're going to sustain it.
Thank you. Thank you, Logan.
I heard an amen and all.
Amen.
That's when you know you're preaching.
So I don't think you can fairly have a conversation about racial equity if you're not going to have a conversation about the role of power and privilege. So that's where we're going to head next. And I think Cornel West captures it best when he said, those who do not serve the people cannot save the people, and those who do not love the people cannot lead the people. So turning to you first, Mary, can you share how JP Morgan Chase work is looking to serve the people and is demonstrating a commitment to racial wealth equity?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think, I actually, one of the things I think is exciting about JP Morgan Chase is many of us who work, and myself included, have come from government and nonprofits. I spent 15 years in government and nonprofits before I became a funder. I really struggled as I started in this role to think about, how do you talk with residents, how do you engage residents in these conversations, and who am I to tell them what they need? And so what are the ways in which we're going to work to have them be able to say what they need and us meet them where they are. But at the end of the day, like a lot of these conversations start from data. And especially at bank, we love data-driven decision-making, right? That's our bread and butter. And so we're fortunate to be able to partner with Prosperity Now to do a racial wealth divide report in Wilmington. So we could be talking from the same language and agree on what the facts are. And I think from there, like, it's really about naming the problem and naming the solution. So one of the things I think I'm really excited about is that we name what we need to do. So when we talk about creating pathways for African Americans, we say we're advancing Black pathways, right? We have an Entrepreneurs of Color Fund. Like, we are intentional about what is the problem. We recognize that there is a racial wealth issue in this country and in Wilmington specifically. And so we are going to tailor solutions to meet the needs of Black residents. And I think the other thing is that we recognize, I think one of the things I was complimenting the purpose-built team on is we have to talk about trust. And in Wilmington, with good reason, and Lillian, you put this in really stark relief, which there is enormous wealth in Wilmington. And there is so little access to it. And so you look around this community and you can see it, you can touch it, but you can't get it. And so I think that's why you have to start with those conversations. You have to talk about mass incarceration and how it affects Black communities. And we have to build solutions that will address those issues. And so that's again, reason why Reach Riverside is such an exciting place to be. Because we're having those conversations in really intentional ways. And again, residents are holding us and the Reach team and other funders accountable.
Thank you. So beyond just being one of the largest investors in Reach, you've both chosen to speak publicly about what's happening in the ecosystem there, but also just personally championing the work of Logan, as an individual. How and why?
Well, the why is, you've already framed it in your introduction. The city needs it. The East Side, even more starkly, needs it. And as Mary just alluded to and Logan had referenced earlier, this is the community speaking. This has been built around the community in authentic ways that I could never create. And so, that is kind of what motivates us and motivates me to engage with the project and Logan as its leader. Mm-hmm. The how is really about making sure that Logan's voice is heard. And that takes many forms, but one is, accompanied him on a meeting with Capital One, who was the owner of the building that the warehouse is going into. It was a unfortunately failed charter school, and so the building was in not great shape, but not awful shape. It was in pretty good shape, and Capital One had a problem of repurposing it, and by joining that conversation, hopefully could help to motivate them to make the donation, which, again, in much larger part because it was Logan, not because I was there, that came to be. Separately, I'm on the board of another organization that runs an annual entrepreneurial idea pitch competition for both for-profit and nonprofit ideas called Reinventing Delaware. Simply made sure that Logan knew about it and came and pitched, and didn't require anything more than just making the opportunity available, and Logan won that competition, which brought some visibility and brought some coaching for him and the teenagers involved in the warehouse. And so I think those are a couple of ways that we've helped get the community to appreciate what Logan can do.
Got it.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
And what's so powerful about this partnership between these two people, I'm not involved in it, but I just want to say, is like there's really great civic leadership here. And like, you know, we talk about the racial wealth divide, and it's true for residents of color, but it's also true for nonprofit leaders of color. It's like knowing where all these pockets exist is really hard, and there's no roadmap. And so having people who will help you like sort through this and figure out where the gold is really is powerful. So that's why like it's such a powerful partnership to be able to navigate these spaces that you don't know where their stuff's hiding.
Yeah, thank you. And Logan, right? So as Mary and Thayer are both leveraging both their power and their privilege, for you and the work in the ecosystem, I know you can agree with this. Logan thinks he's my little brother, but I told him that we're the same age, so I don't really know how that works.
Just because you act like a big sister.
That's a big sister response, you know?
You never had one, so consider yourself.
So I know you will agree with this statement, you know, to whom much is given, much is required, right? You're a native Wilmingtonian. You are experiencing a lot of visibility. You were just named in Delaware 40 under 40. The question that I have for you is, how are you in this stage of your career when you can do a lot of different things, right? Or even use your power right now as you sit, you know, at the seat of, you know, 3 organizations. How are you going to leverage your privilege, your personal privilege, but also the privilege that's on this stage? Or how are you currently leveraging it to shift outcomes for the community members that you guys are really trying to build for right now?
Yeah, great question. One example Thayer didn't mention is that he also invited me to join a board that he chairs, which is the Community Education Building, which is serving 1,200 inner city students to really progress the educational outcomes of our students in the city of Wilmington, where there are great educational disparities. There's only 7 members on that board, and if I were to run down a list in their backgrounds, it's quite intimidating to a person like me. You have Thayer DuPont, like DuPont. If you're from this country, you understand what DuPont means. And you have Logan Herring, who grew up in West Center City, single mother household. Our stories probably couldn't be, you know, too much different, and too much more different than they are right now. And him just leveraging his social capital to allow me a seat at the table, to provide me with access to these opportunities, is truly a tremendous feat within itself. But that's not the equity. The true equity is when I have a seat at the table and I provide a seat or opportunity for someone who looks like me. And I also have a board member, Tony Allen, who is the provost and vice president of Delaware State University, who will be the president of Delaware State University this coming January. Tony just invited me to join his external advisory board for the College of Agricultural Science and Technology. That's equity. And that's I'm getting emotional now because then now what is my responsibility? I have to pay it forward. So it's interesting, I was coming down to this conference, and just last week a colleague, a fellow executive director for another nonprofit called me and said, Logan, I need your help. What can I do? I have a 19-year-old kid, young black man, who's been working for me. I gave him a promotion. He's making $15 an hour. He's doing a tremendous job. But I had to fire him because he stole $1,000 from us. And I had loaned him money before, and he paid it back, and I just don't know why he stole it. And I talked to him, and he admitted it and said, you know, he's taking care of his uncle, his nieces, his nephews. He just, you know, he felt like his pride wouldn't allow him to come and ask for that money again. And he owned it, and he sent out an email and apologized to everybody and sat everybody down and apologized face to face. He said, I can't hire him back, but can you, anything? And I said, set up a meeting. I want to talk to him next week. Because unfortunately, and this is not a knock to Thayer, but Thayer has provided, you know, when he was growing up, or maybe his kids are provided opportunities where they can make mistakes. 19-year-old black man growing up in Wilmington or anywhere in this country, not afforded those opportunities. So I have lunch with him on Friday when I get back, and I'm looking forward just to provide some type of opportunity, some type of second chance, because the clock is running out for when he can find a job, a legitimate job, to continue to make money, or he has to figure out the next best way to provide for his family. And at 19 years old, that shouldn't be a decision that he has to make. So that's how I extend my social capital, and we talked about this on the phone, preparing for this, that funds are great, like, capital, that money is great, but nothing compares to social capital because those funds run out eventually. But the social capital can last for a lifetime or generations, as my fellow DuPont here could tell you. So, yeah, that's
Awesome.
my answer.
All right, lightning round, because I want to make sure we have 15 minutes for questions. So the last area for us as we do work in community is we center the community. You can't achieve racial wealth equity or racial equity if you're not centering the people that you're actually working and serving on behalf of. Our team, we believe that there are 5 critical levers. You guys have got to listen to them because the question is connected to them. Levers to change if we're going to actually get at community level outcomes in a different way. You have to pay attention to program design, pilot development, how you execute and develop partnerships, how you engage with funders and their subsequent investments, and how you actually work to shift policy, right? So lightning round. Of these 5 levers, which lever are you hoping to remain a part of the REACH model as this work continues and move forward? So if each of you can just lightning round.
So I would lean to the partnerships one, and Logan sells himself short. He brings tremendous value to the Community Education Building Board in the knowledge of the community, the leadership of the community, and he's also bringing the same experience set that the Community Education Building is living. The Community Education Building is owns the facility and partners with 2 charter schools that are inside of the building and puts wraparound services around them to help those children succeed. There are more than 3 organizations at every conversation trying to figure out the right answer that somehow matches up with everybody's mission. Logan, you already heard about the 3 organizations, plus all the partners that are involved, excuse me, Mary, plus all the organizations that are involved. And so he's living the same challenge we are. How do you get collective impact? And it's messy day to day. And so he brings that experience to the table. So our ability to execute complex partnerships, we're both living it in different ways and all of half a mile apart.
Awesome. Logan?
Yes,
Yeah.
Logan.
I got you, Mary.
So I'm going to say program design, and I don't even know if that's the appropriate category. But I would say program design because another way that we're empowering people is that we have community members that are a part of our board at the Reach Riverside level, the Kingswood level, soon to be at the warehouse level. I actually told one of the residents that's on our board, I said, you're my boss, right? And she was like, really? I said, hold on, never mind. Scratch that. But also the way we empower through, like when I mentioned we have 100 employees, 25 of them are teens who are helping us to design what it is to be the warehouse. So we are very intentional about the way we design things. And then the last example of that is that we have 8 committees: redevelopment, education, community health, workforce development. The list goes on. But those 8 committees are populated not only by external partners and experts, but by at least 1 or 2 representatives from each board, respectively, of our 3 organizations. So everyone has a stake in the game, but they're also aligned through these committees that are populated by experts, but the work is driven out day by day by our tremendous infrastructure that we've created at Reach Riverside, Kingswood Community Center, and the warehouse. So very intentional about how we design things to make sure that everyone is in alignment, working together with the same vision in mind.
Thank you. And Mary?
So I'd love to say all of them, but I know that's not the right answer. So I'll say both piloting and policy, I think, are sort of the areas where we're most able to be impactful. I think we're fortunate to be testing things all across the country, much like Purpose Built is, and learning from them and being able to bring that back to Wilmington. But I also think, like, at the end of the day, this has got to be a tripod, well, it's probably a square of residents, nonprofits, government, and private industry working together. And so how, as a funder and as a private corporation, one of the largest corporations in the state of Delaware, how are we bringing government to the table and helping support work that we know makes a difference and making sure that it's sustainable over the long term?